Welcome to On My Way to Wealth, the podcast where busy Gen Xers can learn financial tips as they navigate life on their way to wealth. And now, please join your host, Luis Rosa.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of On My Way to Wealth. My name is Luis Rosa, and I'm your host. I have a very special guest with me today. His name is Romeo Perez. Romeo comes from a family of small business owners in South Texas. He founded his own family law practice in 1998 and moved to Las Vegas in 2003. He is currently running for judge in Family Court District Z. And without further ado, Romeo Perez. Welcome, Romeo.
Hey, good morning, Luis. I thank you so much for the chance to talk to you and your listeners today. Very happy to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, we're very excited to have you. I know you're super busy running your own firm and then also your campaign. So I'm sure that your time is just super limited. So thank you so much for taking the time out.
Right. No, great. Thank you. You know what it is? It's been crazy because we've got not only the practice, we've got the campaign, and of course we have Halloween, and the kids want to get ready and find costumes and all that. So whatever that looks like this year, right? We've just got to get ready for it.
Right. That's true. And I'm glad you mentioned that because immediately I love it because you're putting focus on not just all about work. Like, hey, there's also the family side of it so I could tell already how you prioritize that. So thank you for sharing that. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and your firm and how you got to where you are today?
So, I grew up in a small town on the Texas-Mexican border. It's McAllen, Texas. So I grew up there. My grandparents owned businesses. My grandfather on my dad's side had a gas station, a Chevron station. And my grandfather had a produce warehouse. So when my dad, growing up, my dad had his construction company. So I was kind of surrounded by business people, right? So I had to go to work, right? They didn't just let me stay at home and watch TV, which would have been awesome. They actually had me up. And you know what? I'm very glad that they did that because that instills a hard work ethic from a young age. You see your grandparents, you see your parents work. You see them build things, to build businesses, to build people, to employ people. And that brought so much to my life, I think. And that gave me the strong work ethic that I have today, in running my own office. And of course, when I graduated law school in 1998, I said, well, of course I have to open up my own office because I'm my own business person, right? That's what I've seen all my life. And that's what I did. And from day one, we've come out just opening our own business. So.
Wow, that's impressive. Yeah, because I know probably most people first go and get their feet wet, start working for a firm and hope to become partners, right?
I took the hard way,
Of course. But it's something that nobody could ever take away from you. That the hard work that your parents and grandparents instilled in you, it's like, it doesn't matter what happens, right? You can always rebuild, right? You just got that ethic in you. Nobody can take that away from you. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So can you tell our listeners what exactly falls under the umbrella of family law?
Well, early on, Luis, I decided that family law was kind of my passion because it dealt more with people. I have other lawyers who say, man, you've got to be a saint. I don't know how you do the family law because that stuff is, people come with so many problems and issues that they want to talk about. And really, family law is about telling the stories, right? You've got to, people, because anybody who comes through my door is usually not happy to see me. They're there because they have a problem that they want fixed, they want closure, and they want to move on. Family law is divorce, child support, and child custody. That's what we see the most of. But you have a lot of people coming in with problems with juvenile justice, which is when their kids get in trouble with the criminal law. You have abuse and neglect, which you've heard CPS cases, when the county comes in and steps in and takes the children for the protection of the kids. But you've also got guardianship, which I think we've heard a little bit about over the last couple of years with some of the abuse that's gone on. So that's important to take care of people who are under guardianships. But we've also got grandparents' rights and other issues that come up in family court. So really, I found that you are more likely to be in front of a family court judge than almost any other kind of judge in the county. And those family court judges are the most important. So I was drawn to family law because I'm a people person. I like people. I like to hug. I like to shake. I like to see people. And I like to hear the stories. And then I like to tell the stories. And I think it's a lot about compassion. It's a lot about, understanding what people are talking about. So family law is very personal to me. And that's why I think I took to it pretty early on.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's awesome that it's a passion. It's not just a job or a career to you. And that's very important. And, I think that shines through, so thank you for sharing that. Now, you mentioned some key things that I often talk about with my clients. Typically, as part of the financial planning process, one of the things I look at with my clients is going over their estate plan. And, sometimes it's very simple questions like, hey, do you have a will? Do you have a trust? Anything like that? And, a lot of the times, initially when I first get with my clients, the answer is no. And a lot of the times I feel like there's a misconception that you need to be rich in order to have a will or have a lot of money. And I tell people, look, there are things that aren't even related to money that you need to have in place. For example, like you mentioned, guardianship. I said, look, you have minor children. God forbid you go on a vacation, you and your husband, and you both die in an accident. Like, who's going to take care of those kids, right? So that's something that someone can make part of like their will and have in place beforehand. In your case, that you see.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Louis, that's so important. People come in and talk to me even after the divorce. Is like, okay, so what happens to the kids? Is always a question. Unfortunately, I've had cases where people come in and say, well, my daughter had primary custody. We haven't seen the dad in years, and now he wants to show up. But mom didn't do anything to set up a guardianship or to say what happens after she would have passed. Even though the kids have no idea who dad is, dad still has rights. Gosh, I can't tell you how important, the estate planning is and trust are, because that tells other people what's supposed to happen, what your will is for what's supposed to happen after they pass away. So important. Guardianships are important. The trust to set up if they have the means to be able to make sure that even insurance proceeds that are deposited into a trust to make sure that the kids are taken care of, or that a house is paid for in full so that the kids have a place to live, or that there's some type of accommodation for the children if something were to happen. It's so important. And then it's really important that they keep it up to date, right? Because life changes. We have other things we have to add to the trust. We have things we take out. We have things that need to be sure that are placed in there for the care of the kids. So yeah, that it's hugely important.
Yeah, that's one of the things I do with my clients as part of the financial planning process is have at least an annual review, because like you said, there's always life events. People get married, they get divorced, there's new children added, etc. So let me ask you this. What happens, let's say somebody unfortunately did not prepare. They didn't put these things in place. And you have, for example, an event where a couple dies and they didn't have in writing who they wanted the guardian of those children to be. Like, how does that work? Does a court determine then at that point the process?
So generally, if both parents were to pass away, that takes away the first layer of who has priority. The next layer of priority would be just anybody else who has a relationship within I believe it's a fifth degree of consanguinity. So you're looking at grandparents and aunts and uncles, or even older brothers and sisters, if that's possible. But generally, that does take a court order, because you have to be able to put those kids in school and put them into doctors and things like that. Without a parent available or someone with authority to do that, it's almost impossible to get that done. So yeah, you would need to get a court order either for guardianship or some type of custodial arrangement to give them authority to take care of those kids.
Got it. Yeah. So I could see a scenario where the person that ultimately gets court appointed might not necessarily be who the parents it would have intended had they had it in writing, right? And I feel like sometimes that happens a lot in the Latino community. Like, I see me growing up, like, none of these things were ever a topic in my household. Like, even life insurance, like even simple stuff like that. Like, it just, so I've mentioned this before in other episodes where every time, like the best case scenario that I had seen growing up when somebody passed was that they left enough money to be buried with. And that was considered like good. Like, oh, wow, they left enough money for the burial. Like, I never heard anybody growing up that died with life insurance or even a will in place. I mean, none of that stuff, so super important. And that's one of the things that I bring up in my conversations. Like, I know it's morbid and, maybe you don't want to talk about this, but like you brought up a great point. Sometimes you might have a scenario where dad isn't in the picture and all of a sudden something happened to the mom. And now like this guy just comes out of nowhere, right? Hasn't seen the kids in years. That's a problem for sure.
I'm going to share something with you, Lewis, is that I'll tell you from my family, I started out telling you that they're business owners and they were pretty sophisticated. I mean, they ran their businesses, but you know what? The one thing that is heartbreaking is that people get nervous when they talk about money. People get nervous when they talk about their assets and they get very private, right? So I had grandparents who had a significant number of assets and wealth that died without wills. Like what the heck? How do you not appropriate for these things? Some lawyer, somebody should have sat them down and had a heart to heart and said, hey, you need to set up a trust. You need to set up a will. You need to tell us what to do. But when you pass away without a will or a trust, so many things that you may not want to happen are going to happen. And that's why it's so important to plan and privacy. And I don't know maybe pride's not the right word, but people just get very private about their financial and they don't want to talk about it. And that keeps you from moving forward to setting up the trust and the will.
Yeah. And you bring up a good point. If you think about it this way, sometimes that fear that, wanting to be private prevents people from having these conversations and putting these things into place. But at the same time, they don't realize that if they die without a will, then things won't be private at all because now it's going to go into probate. And then your business is technically a matter of public record, right? At that point. And now you have your heirs that are dealing already with the devastation of your loss to then have to make all these decisions in their, possibly not the best state of mind, right? So it's something to consider for sure. Yeah, thank you for that. Now, you also mentioned divorce as one of the areas that you help your clients navigate. Does the state where you live kind of has any impact as far as like what happens to your assets and liabilities in the case of a divorce?
Yes, absolutely it does. I'm licensed to practice in Texas and Nevada. And I know that immediately one of the biggest things that people come and ask in Nevada is there common law marriage? Because California has common law marriage and they're right next door. And we have a lot of people who moved in from California. And basically common law marriage is if you move in together and you present yourself as Mr. and Mrs. Perez, then if the world thinks you're Mr. and Mrs. Perez, by common law, you're commonly known as Mr. and Mrs. Perez. That is not recognized in Nevada. It is recognized in California. It's recognized in Texas, where I'm also licensed. But here, it doesn't matter. If you've lived together 22 years and you never got married and he were to die or she were to die, what was hers is hers, what's his is his. Even got people who buy houses together. And they said, well, no, I put everything in her name because she had the credit. Well, man, you're going to have a hard time proving that any of that house is yours because it's separate property. So there's no common law marriage here. So that's a big change.
Yeah, that's huge. Wow. And then, it's interesting that you mentioned that because I've seen those scenarios where people go ahead and buy joint properties. Like you said, maybe the husband's credit wasn't that great and they put it in the wife's name or vice versa. And yeah, that could be quite the problem later on if things go sour and they need to separate and just coming up with what's what and who's entitled to what, right?
I mean, if it's a husband and wife, it's different. But if they're just dating, they're just boyfriend and girlfriend, that's when the problems come.
Got it. So tell me just a little bit, like in general, like the difference between community property and common law.
So community property is anything that's acquired after the marriage. So from day one, the day you say I do forward, if you buy anything, half of it belongs to the other person. So if you have something before marriage, like say typically somebody will come in with a house that they purchased prior to the marriage, that is generally considered separate property. So the other spouse would not necessarily be entitled to it. Now, there are equations and all that we do as lawyers to figure out if there is a benefit to the community from the separate property, and then it may commingle the separate property into community property. But generally, if somebody has money in an account or an IRA or something before marriage, that money is considered separate property. And only anything afterwards, unless there's a prenuptial agreement, would then be considered community property.
Got it. And then does that apply to debt as well?
Well, debt would be separate debt coming into the marriage. Now, if the person goes and applies for a credit card after the marriage, it's almost always considered community property.
Okay, so I just want to. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, community debt is what I meant. Yeah.
Community debt. So, for example, let's say I get married, and after the marriage, I go ahead and run up $20,000 in credit cards in my name alone. If I live in a state where it's community property, then my debt will be considered like my new wife would be considered to have some liability then as a result of me running up my own debt.
Maybe. And I'll tell you the answer to most legal questions are maybe.
Oh yeah, same thing with financial planning and taxes. I'm always like possibly yes, because there might be some loophole, there might be an exception. Yeah, but generally,
What happens is, let's say Lewis uses his credit card to buy a refrigerator, right? Which goes into the house, which is the family. Towels, going out to eat, things for the kids, whatever. That's all going to be community debt, and your wife would be responsible for half of that. Let's say Lewis takes out a credit card and he goes to Hawaii with his girlfriend, and that's not for the benefit of the community, and your wife is not going to have to pay for that. That's considered waste. So you've wasted the money on something separate that had no benefit to the community. So they probably not hold her liable for your vacation to Hawaii with your girlfriend.
okay, well that makes sense. I'm glad that's in place. Thank you for explaining that. That's pretty cool. What about inheritances? Does that have any impact as well?
Yes, inheritance is almost always separate property. So, like if I got something from my grandmother, my wife would not have had any ability to attach that to the community unless I commingle it. And generally, what they do is they say, "Hey, I got a $500 check from my uncle. It says to Romeo, and I deposit it in my joint account. Now it becomes mine and my wife's because I've now put it in a community account."
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I know sometimes things can get a little complicated too. If somebody, for example, has been married a second time, and they have things that they want to leave to their kids from the prior marriage and all that. So, very important to go ahead and sit down with somebody like yourself and plan ahead and make sure that things are put into place. So, you mentioned earlier about prenup agreements, and I know that maybe they're not as common. You usually hear it when people are famous and have a ton of money, but based on what you have shared with us so far, it sounds like in some instances it might make sense to do for some people. Like when do you usually would recommend, or at least have that conversation with your clients that a prenup might be a good idea?
You know what? Anytime somebody has assets coming into a marriage that they would like to protect, that's when a prenup or premarital agreement is important. It can be, you're right, sometimes when families come together, they're blended families, and you've got two kids or something with another marriage, and the other person is bringing, assets or kids from another marriage, and now you're getting together. And you want to protect those things for the first family. That can be done. I've done a number of prenups, a number of premarital agreements, especially probably in the last year and a half. A lot of people have come in to protect their retirements. People have come in to protect houses. They want to make sure that their businesses are taken care of. And the thing about prenups is that you have to make sure that both sides are represented. Because I've had so many people who come in for a divorce and say, "Well, I didn't know what I was signing. He brought me to a lawyer's office. I had 5 minutes to look at it." And of course, these prenups are typically at least 10 to 20 pages long, depending on the assets. And if a client comes and tells me, "Hey, I had 5 minutes to look at it. I didn't take it anywhere. They wouldn't let me leave," or many times I don't speak English. They gave it to me in English. Nobody translated it, or they gave me just a quick. You have to knowingly give up your rights to the property. And a lot of times in these, especially when businesses, what is in these prenups is locks out the new spouse to any future income from the business or any future income from the house. So if you come in with a house that, let's say you bought in 2008, right? Everything crashed and the houses were as low as you could get them, and that house cost you $100,000. Well, now those houses you could probably find for $300,000. They've gone up significantly in 12 years because of the market, because you bought it right. But ordinarily, the new spouse would have some some part of that $200,000 increase just by virtue of having been around for the last 12 years and having invested in mortgage payments and maybe improvements and maintenance and things like that. But with a prenup, those prenups, we usually prepare them to say, you're not entitled to any increase, whether market or by improvements or any other reason. So now the person who has the prenup has protected that house 100%. And the spouse who has invested, a lot of times I get people who come in and say, well, we put in new tile, we put in a roof, we put in an air conditioner, which are all significant expenses. But the prenup says, no, anything that was provided to the separate property is considered a gift, and therefore you're not entitled, so you're out. And those are very difficult to overcome. So to do a proper prenup, you need to both be represented and have an opportunity to ask the questions of not only what the words are, but what those words mean.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I've also heard of post-nuptial agreements. Can you tell us a little bit about what those are?
Post-nup agreements are kind of a reset after you get married. So after you get married, there are particular statutes that require certain things to happen for you to get a post-nup agreement, because at that point, depending on when you get it done after the marriage, you have now created a community property estate. So how do we cut off the community property estate from now to create a separate property estate? And I've done a few of those because people come in afterwards and they've acquired through inheritance or through whatever. They will pick up something that they would like to keep separate. And you can do that. And there are specific statutes to do that, but you can protect even after the marriage.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I'm sure those are difficult conversations for some couples to have.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, this has been such a great wealth of information. So I appreciate you sharing with us. So little birdie told me that you were running for family court judge, right? So can you tell us a little bit about your candidacy?
I am. Thank you. You know what? I'm running for family court in Department Z. So I'm my wife says, says last on the ballot, first in your heart. I'm actually the very last district court judge that you can vote for. I'm on page 3 of the ballot. So, I tell people, get a good night's sleep, eat your good breakfast in the morning before you go vote, because it's going to be a long time before you see me. You almost intentionally have to come and find me in Department Z. So, the first, the number courts, there's 32 numbered courts. It's civil and criminal court. And then there's family courts, and the family courts are letters. And this year, the Assembly decided to add 6 new family court departments because the family courts are so overwhelmed with cases. They're carrying over 1,000 cases apiece, some of them. Yeah, so it just makes things kind of slow. And so, in order to help alleviate the pain of family court and the number of people who are seeking family court assistance, they've added 6 departments. And I wanted to take this opportunity to bring my experience, to bring my 22 years of experience to the bench.
Got it. Be on the other side of it now. How long are the terms if you get elected?
It's a 6-year term. That's why you see so many of them right now on the ballot. Somebody told me last night there were 61 judges that they voted for yesterday. So, we're all on the ballot at the same time, Louis, and it's going to be a long, long road, but yeah.
Wow, I bet. And the elections coincide with the general elections as well?
Right. So my ballot is for November 3rd also. So when you go in and vote for the president, you're going to be able to vote for everybody all at once.
Got it. And what would happen then if you got elected? Would you have to leave your practice as a result?
I would have to leave my practice. It would be a hard close. It'd be hard to do. But I tell you what, like I mentioned, my grandparents and my parents were all in business. But one of the things that they also taught me was giving back to the community. My grandparents were big, and my dad was big about always helping people, always volunteering, always giving, opening up. One of the fun memories I have is my grandfather, whenever he would have his employees work late at the produce shed, he would barbecue for them. He'd send a guy out and he'd say, hey, go get, 100 pounds worth of fajitas and some tortillas, and, let's get this thing rolling to keep everybody working, right? And man, everybody just loved it. They'd come over and they'd drink, sodas and whatever and eat and get back to work. But you know what? they were so happy to be able to just grab a bite that somebody cared enough for them. And my grandparents and my father were always in church. We were brought up in Catholic church, and we're always making sure that we were at the carmesas and all the places that to help and to volunteer. So public service, community service is something that's in my heart. We do the same thing now with my family. I volunteer with the Boy Scouts, my son, the Girl Scouts, my daughter. I volunteer at our church. I volunteer with Catholic Charities. My whole family does, and we're trying to instill that in my kids. So to be judge would be the next level of service. I've enjoyed being a lawyer. I really have, and I think I've been pretty good at it. I was recognized recently by Vegas Inc. as one of the top lawyers in Las Vegas. So that was pretty neat. They brought that to me yesterday. So
congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. So, I think that this is a good move. I think it's the right time for me, and I'm looking forward to serving on the bench, given the opportunity.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it's such a, like now you get to combine all the experience you've had as an attorney and with people and just, continue that service. Yeah, I love it. Thank you for sharing that story about, your grandparents and just feeding the workers and everybody. I mean, I could just picture, as you were saying, that's pretty awesome. So where can people find you online?
So for my campaign, it's www.romeo and then the number 4 judge.com. And that they'll find out a lot of information. Of course, I'm also on social media. Right now, Louis, with the pandemic and the quarantine, we've had to move all of our campaign online. There's no more meet and greets, no more hugs and handshakes, so no door to door. So we're doing things online. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter under Romeo and the number 4 judge.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, and for those of you listening, I'll be putting a link to all of those, the website and the social media accounts in the episode notes. This is episode number 40, so you could just go to onmywaytowealth.com and just find episode 40, and you'll have all the links for the contacts for Romeo. Well, thank you, Romeo, so much for joining us today. I definitely learned a lot. I appreciate you sharing the stories as well. I could tell how, your family, just everything that they instilled in you from a kid just shines through, when you speak. So I appreciate that. I wanted to ask you one thing before I let you go, and that would be, if you can change one thing in the world, what would that be?
You know what? It's a difficult time we're living in right now. You know what? I want people to just relax. I want people to get back to the time where we could have a discussion and disagree and walk away friends. I think right now the world is so adverse. We don't even listen to each other anymore unless we're with the friends who agree with us. I don't know when it turned that we got to be so mean. When did we get to be so mean to each other? When do we get to be so intolerant of other people's ideas or thoughts? We're not even intolerant anymore. We've gone beyond that. We're almost cruel to people who think different than us. We've gotten to where we call them names, and it's okay to bully people, and it's not. It's really not. And you know what? It affects our kids and affects my kids, Louis. My kids see that not only in among their peers, but when they're facing it on the news, they're facing it on TV, they're facing it with their friends. It's just very disappointing. And you try as much as you can to protect your kids from that kind of stuff, but it's hard. And the one thing I would change is to tell people, just relax. It's okay to have a different idea. It's okay. We can be friends. We can get along. Maybe your idea is better than my idea. Let's figure it out. But if you don't listen and you're only talking, then nothing ever changes.
Yeah, that is very powerful. It's so true. I think it almost has been normalized, like you were saying, to, if it's like us versus them. That's it. And one thing that I feel like contributes to this a little bit could be the way the social media works. I've noticed, I was watching it was a documentary on Netflix. They were talking about how social media works, and basically the more you like something, an article or a video, the more the algorithm is going to feed you things like that, right? So you end up being in your own little world. Two people can be standing next to each other and hit their news icon on their phone and get a completely different feed based on what the algorithm thinks you should be watching. So sometimes, we get caught up in our own world where now the only thing we read and see are things that agree with our already existing opinion, right? And then we just become like so isolated that, if anybody else has a varying view from us, it just becomes like, whoa, it's like war, right? There's no like, a lot of people don't want to have that common ground anymore, so I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, I saw that documentary. It was really good. We actually made our kids watch it because, kids are in their phones, right? And that's what they see a lot of time. And I did see that. And that was really good and kind of scary.
Yeah. It's super scary for sure. But, it's very eye-opening too. And one of the things that one of the people that was being interviewed mentioned was that she purposely followed people who she disagrees with online just to keep the algorithm guessing and just feeding her stuff that she may not necessarily agree with. So that was pretty interesting to watch.
What, I was going to tell you that I follow Joe Biden and Donald Trump on Twitter.
Yeah.
So then you get both sides. And then I have friends who are on both sides. And I consider these people friends even on both sides. We may not agree on everything, but I want to know, what's going on the other side. I mean, I'll watch Fox News, CNN, and MSNBC. I'll watch them all because you've got to know. I mean, why would you close your mind to the possibility that things could change?
That's true. That's true too. Even, and you bring up a good point as well with the news. That it's the same concept as the social media. Like if you watch Fox, you're going to hear something else than CNN, and vice versa, right? So everybody has like some sort of agenda where you're no longer just being informed, that there's some sort of influence in the programming as well, right? So, but I'm glad that, you are aware of it and you made your kids watch it. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I had to watch it. I said, if I'm going to watch this, you got to know because your face is in that phone all the time.
All the time. Yeah. It's like, it's always with them. Right? It's like part of us now, right? Yeah. Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Romeo. I appreciate you coming out and, hopefully this pandemic blows over and we can, see each other soon in person, one of the Latin Chamber events or something. That'll be great. Certainly miss that. So thank you again for being on the show and good luck with the candidacy. And hopefully next time we see each other, you'll be on the bench.
Oh, that's me in Department C, Romeo Perez in Department C. So thank you very much, Louis. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for listening to On My Way to Wealth. If you have any questions, please send me an email at luis@onmywaytowealth.com. The information provided here is for information and education purposes only. The opinions expressed herein are solely those of myself, unless otherwise specifically cited. Material presented is believed to be from reliable sources, and no representations are made by my firm or myself about other parties' information or accuracy or completeness. All information or ideas provided should be discussed in detail with a financial advisor, accountant, or legal counsel prior to implementation. Thank you.